Hello, I'm Michael, and if you're here, it's because you're as attracted to fear as I am. Luana, a young 28-year-old photographer, decides to embark on a luxurious cruise called Oceano Eterno, leaving from Rio de Janeiro. After months of exhausting work in São Paulo, she sees the trip as an opportunity to relax and explore the Brazilian coast. The ship is known for its grandeur, with dozens of floors, sparkling pools, exquisite restaurants, and even a historical exhibition about ancient shipwrecks. On board, Luana is enchanted by the vibrant environment and stunning landscapes. Your camera is your faithful companion, recording every detail: the reflection of the sun on the sea, the ship's ornate corridors, and the lively parties that take place every night. Despite the happy atmosphere, she feels something strange in the air, an inexplicable feeling of discomfort that she cannot ignore. On the first night, while reviewing her photos in the cabin, Luana notices something disturbing. In several images, shadowy figures appear in the background, like indistinct figures, who were not present when he took the photos. She tries to rationalize what happened, attributing it to camera failures or light reflections, but the feeling that something is wrong persists. As the days pass, the ship seems to change. What was once a welcoming and luxurious environment begins to become oppressive. Hallways seem darker at night. The sounds of the sea become louder and more unsettling, and crew members avoid visual contact with passengers. Luana realizes that she is not the only one feeling this. Other passengers also show signs of discomfort. On the second night, during a themed party in the main hall, the lights suddenly flash. The ship plunges into darkness for a few minutes. When the power returns, one of the passengers is missing. The crew members try to calm the others, but there is a growing atmosphere of tension among everyone. Back in her cabin that night, Luana finds something that makes her heart race. On the bathroom mirror, there are marks written as if they were made by wet fingers. The words are jumbled and fragmented, but they seem to form a message. They are here. The message disappears as soon as she tries to wipe it off with a towel. Over the next few days, inexplicable events begin to occur throughout the ship. Objects move by themselves in the cabins. Footsteps echo in the deserted corridors at dawn, and more passengers begin to disappear without explanation. Luana feels that she is constantly being watched and notices that the shadowy figures in the photos seem to be getting closer and closer to her. Determined to find out what is happening, Luana begins to explore less frequented areas of the ship. In one of the lower corridors, she finds a locked room with signs of rust on the door, something out of place on such a luxurious cruise ship. As she looks closer, she notices ancient inscriptions carved into the wood of the door, strange symbols that she cannot identify. As she investigates the ship further, Luana discovers snippets of disturbing information. The Eternal Ocean was built on the wreckage of another ship that sank decades ago under mysterious circumstances. Supposedly, all the passengers in that shipwreck disappeared without a trace. No bodies were found. As she tries to process these discoveries, Luana feels a presence behind her in the silent corridors of the ship. She turns quickly, but there's no one there. Just the distant sound of waves crashing against the ship's hull. The feeling of being watched intensifies. Back at her cabin that night, she finds her camera lying on the floor with the viewfinder cracked. When she turns it on to check the latest photos, taken automatically by the night shutter, she sees something that freezes her blood, a shadowy figure standing at the foot of her bed as she sleeps. Luana, now deeply restless, begins to realize that events on the ship are intensifying. Passenger disappearances become more frequent, but the crew continues to act as if nothing is wrong. The crew's environment, once vibrant and luxurious, now seems charged with a heavy, suffocating energy. The laughter and music that filled the halls give way to an oppressive silence during the night, broken only by inexplicable sounds. Footsteps echoing in empty corridors, doors creaking for no reason, and the distant sound of something scratching the metal walls of the ship. Luana decides to investigate further. She begins to explore restricted areas of the ship, guided by her intuition and the need to understand what is happening. On one of these forays, she finds an abandoned maintenance room on the lower levels. Inside, there are ancient documents and nautical maps that mention the sinking of the Aurora Maris, the ship on whose wreckage the Eternal Ocean was built. The notes are confusing, but they mention an event that occurred during a storm, reports of passengers who mysteriously disappeared before the sinking. As Luana tries to put the pieces of the puzzle together, she realizes that she is not alone in her search for answers. Other passengers also began to notice the strange events. However, as she tries to get closer to them to share her discoveries, she notices that many are disappearing or acting strangely, as if something is controlling them. During a particularly tense night, Luana feels like she is being followed as she walks through the deserted corridors. She quickens her pace, but the sounds of footsteps behind her also increase in intensity. When she finally turns to face who or what was behind her, there is no one, just the empty hallway and the lights blinking intermittently. She returns to her cabin only to find something terrifying. Her photos have been scattered across the floor. In all of them, the shadowy figures are clearer now. They have human shapes, but their faces are distorted, as if they were deformed masks. In one of the photos, Luana recognizes Carla, the missing passenger from the themed party. Carla is among the shadowy figures, with empty eyes and a macabre smile. Luana begins to realize that Henrique, the mysterious writer she met in the first days of the trip, seems to know more about what is happening than he lets on. He is often seen in secluded areas of the ship, writing frantically in an old notebook. Although he avoids direct contact with the other passengers, Luana finds fragments of his writings left behind in different parts of the ship. The texts talk about doors between worlds and echoes of the lost. Henrique seems to believe that the ship is more than a simple means of transport. It would be a kind of portal to something beyond human understanding. He repeatedly mentions the marked ones, people chosen never to return to dry land. Meanwhile, Raphael, the charismatic doctor with whom Luana had spoken in the first few days, begins to act strangely. He looks exhausted and avoids eye contact with everyone. During dinner in the main hall, now almost empty, Luana observes Raphael sitting alone at a distant table. He holds something in his hands, a piece of rusty metal that appears to be part of some ancient artifact. While continuing her investigation in the lower levels of the ship, Luana discovers a secret room hidden behind a loose panel in the wall. Inside are ancient objects, torn clothes and personal belongings covered in moss and rust, clearly items recovered from the sinking of the Aurora Maris. In the center of the room is a huge mirror with an ornate frame that appears to pulse slightly in the dim light of Luana's flashlight. When she moves closer to examine the mirror more closely, she sees her distorted reflection, not as she herself is now, but as someone aged and consumed by fear. As he instinctively steps back, he notices marks on the floor around the mirror, symbols identical to those engraved on the rusty door he found earlier. As she hurriedly leaves the secret room, Luana feels the ground tremble slightly beneath her feet. The distant sound of something heavy scratching against the walls returns, but now it's closer than ever. She runs through the corridors trying to find a safe place when she sees Henrique standing at the end of the corridor with his notebook in his hands. He looks directly at her for the first time since the start of the trip. Before she can react or try to talk to him, the lights flicker again and everything goes dark. When the ship's lights flicker and go out, Luana is swallowed by an oppressive darkness. The sound of something scratching the metal of the hull resonates around him, now louder and closer. Her heart races as she tries to find her way around the hallway, feeling the walls for support. Suddenly, a faint glow appears in the distance, a bluish light emanating from an indistinct point at the end of the corridor. Luana hesitates, but curiosity dominates her. She heads toward the light, her footsteps echoing in the unsettling silence. When he reaches the end of the corridor, He finds a door ajar. Inside, there is a room that does not look like it belongs on the modern ship. The walls are made of damp, aged wood, as if they were part of an ancient ship. In the center of the room, the mirror she had previously found is now completely illuminated by an unearthly light. As she approaches, Luana sees something terrifying. The mirror reflects not only herself, but also shadowy figures around her. They stand behind her, motionless, with distorted faces and empty eyes. When she quickly turns to look back, there is no one there, just the emptiness of the dark hallway. Suddenly, the mirror begins to vibrate and emit a low, pulsing sound, like a beating heart. The shiny surface turns into something liquid, rippling like water. Luana feels an invisible force pulling her towards the mirror. She tries to resist, but is sucked into him. Luana awakens in a completely different place, an old and decaying ship with narrow corridors full of rust. The air is heavy and smells of salt and rot. She realizes that she is barefoot and her clothes are wet, as if she had just come out of the sea. As he explores the place, he discovers that he is aboard the Aurora Maris, the ship that sank decades ago. The shadowy figures that once appeared in his photos are now everywhere. They wander the corridors silently, like living shadows. Some appear to be passengers. Others have grotesque, deformed shapes, as if they had been consumed by time or something even darker. As she walks through the ghost ship, Luana finds familiar objects. Her broken camera is in one of the cabins. The photos he took in the eternal ocean are scattered across the floor. Even the belongings of the missing passengers are there, including the necklace that Carla wore on the night of the theme party. She realizes that the disappearances in the eternal ocean were connected to this place. The passengers hadn't simply disappeared. They had been brought onto this cursed ship. Luana begins to understand that the Aurora Maris is not just a ship lost in time. He is a kind of prison for lost souls. Those who enter it can never get out. The shadowy figures are the former passengers of the Aurora Maris, people trapped between life and death, condemned to eternally wander the rusty corridors. While exploring the upper deck of the ghost ship, Luana encounters Henrique again. He is sitting on an old wooden chair, writing frantically in his notebook. His eyes are sunken and he looks exhausted, as if he has been there far longer than should be possible. She watches Henry from a distance as he writes about the eternal cycle, a connection between the Aurora Maris and the eternal ocean. He mentions that the new ship was deliberately built on the wreckage of the old one to lure lost souls back to the sea. The goal was not only to transport live passengers, but also to feed something much older and more evil, an entity linked to the depths of the ocean. Reality begins to weigh on Luana. She realizes she may never escape this place, just like the other passengers before her. The idea of being trapped there forever is suffocating, but she refuses to give up. Determined to find a way out, she decides to confront the mystery directly. While exploring the lower levels of the Aurora Maris, Luana finds an old diary belonging to the captain of the sunken ship. The last pages describe events similar to those that occurred in the eternal ocean. Unexplained disappearances, shadowy figures appearing in the corridors, and whispers coming from the walls. The captain wrote about an invisible force that pulled the souls of the living to feed the heart of the ocean. At the bottom of the room where she found the diary, Luana sees something terrifying, a huge hole in the hull of the Aurora Maris, a dark opening which appears to lead directly to the depths of the ocean. As she cautiously approaches the edge, she feels a powerful energy emanating from there, something alive and conscious. Luana realizes that this hole is the source of everything, the disappearances in the eternal ocean, the shadowy figures, and even the sinking of the Aurora Maris itself. It's as if it were a portal between worlds, a point where the laws of reality no longer apply. While observing the pulsing hole in the hull of the ghost ship, Luana feels something grab her ankle tightly. She looks down and sees one of the shadowy figures trying to pull her into the dark opening. She struggles desperately to free herself as other shadows begin to emerge from the walls around her. The last thing she sees before being swallowed by the darkness is her own image reflected in the liquid surface of the hole, but not as she is now. In the reflection, she is already one of the shadows. Luana awakens again, but this time in an even more strange and oppressive environment. She is submerged in darkness, surrounded by water, but can breathe. The sound of deep, rhythmic beats echoes in the distance, like the beating of a gigantic heart. Around him, indistinct shapes move slowly, shadows that seem alive but without defined form. Space has no clear boundaries. It's as if she's suspended between two worlds, trapped in a limbo where time and space don't exist. She feels something different inside her, a strength that wasn't there before. Despite the overwhelming fear, there is a growing determination. Luana realizes that she is still alive and that perhaps there is a way to escape this eternal cycle. But to do so, she will need to face the origin of the evil that brought her there. As she walks or floats through the dark, endless space, Luana begins to notice patterns in the darkness. The shadows around you are not just random figures. They seem to follow an order, as if they were being guided by something greater. Some of these shadows try to approach her, but they hesitate, as if they recognize something in her that prevents them from attacking. Luana realizes that the shadows are the lost passengers of the Aurora Maris and the eternal ocean, trapped in this limbo for decades or even centuries. They no longer have consciousness or identity of their own. They are just fragments of souls consumed by the entity that inhabits the heart of the ocean. However, some of them still seem to struggle against this fate, sharper figures that move hesitantly, as if trying to remember who they were. As she explores this shadowy space deeper, Luana finds familiar objects floating in the void. The camera that he wore, Enrique's notebook, and even Carla's necklace on the cruise. These objects appear to glow faintly, as if they were anchors to a lost reality. She collects them instinctively, feeling that they might be important. In the center of Limbo, Luana finally finds the origin of everything, a gigantic pulsating mass of black, liquid energy, similar to the hole in the hull of the Aurora Maris. This entity appears alive, with tentacles made of shadow that extend into the surrounding space. Each pulse emits a deep, resonant sound that makes the entire environment vibrate. Luana realizes that this entity is the heart of the ocean, mentioned in the writings of the captain of the Aurora Maris. She is responsible for luring ships to their destruction and for imprisoning the souls of passengers in her eternal cycle of suffering. The entity appears to be feeding on these souls to grow and expand its influence. While observing the entity, Luana feels an inexplicable connection with it, as if part of her had already been consumed by the heart of the ocean. However, she also realizes something important. The entity is not invincible. The reality anchors she has encountered, the passengers' objects, seem to weaken her influence whenever they are nearby. Determined to destroy the heart of the ocean and free the souls trapped there, Luana begins to gather the shiny objects scattered throughout Limbo. Each object appears to contain fragments of the missing passengers' memories, happy or important moments that still resist the darkness. As you collect more objects, the shadows around you begin to react violently. They try to stop her from reaching the heart of the ocean, attacking her with increasing force. Luana fights to protect herself as she slowly advances towards the central entity. Along the way, she encounters Enrique again, or what's left of him. He is partially consumed by darkness, with half of his body turned into shadow. Despite this, he still holds his notebook tightly in his remaining hand. Upon seeing her, Enrique hands the notebook to Luana before being completely swallowed by the shadows. The notebook contains detailed instructions on how to destroy the heart of the ocean. The shiny objects must be used to create a rupture in the central entity, exposing its vulnerable core. Upon getting close to the central entity, Luana realizes that destroying the heart of the ocean will have serious consequences. The rupture will not only free the souls trapped there, it will also destroy everything connected to the entity, including itself. To break the eternal cycle of suffering, Luana will have to sacrifice her own life. She hesitates for a moment as she holds the shiny objects in her hands. The memories contained within them begin to flood your mind. Images of passengers smiling before the tragedy, happy moments shared with their families, dreams and hopes that were interrupted by the ship's curse. These memories give him the strength to continue. Even though she knows she will never see the light of day again, Luana decides to move on. With the objects gathered around the central entity, Luana begins to recite the words written in Henrique's notebook. The heart of the ocean begins to react violently. Its pulsations become erratic, and its tentacles begin to crumble into liquid pieces. However, as she performs the final ritual to destroy the entity, Luana feels something strange inside her. A part of her is being pulled into the entity, along with the shadows around her. She realizes that she is becoming part of the very darkness she tried to destroy. The last thing she sees before she is swallowed by the void is a bright flash, an explosion of light emanating from the glowing objects as they rupture the entity's core. The moment the glowing objects rupture the entity's core, Limbo is filled with an explosion of blinding light. The pulsing sound of the heart of the ocean transforms into a deafening scream, as if the entity itself is being torn apart. The darkness around her begins to shatter like cracking glass, revealing fragments of something beyond. Flashes of the ocean, the sky, and even the ship Eternal Ocean, now engulfed in chaos. Luana feels her body being pulled in all directions. The entity's gravitational force seems to struggle to regain itself, trying to drag it into itself. But the shiny objects she has gathered continue to shine brightly, creating larger cracks in the shadowy structure. Each crack releases fragments of the trapped souls, which begin to float around her like translucent figures. The shadows that once haunted her are now crumbling along with the entity. They twist and disappear in silent screams, like smoke being sucked into the void. Luana realizes that she is at the center of everything, the breaking point between two worlds. The entity, even weakened, does not give up its fight. Tentacles made of pure darkness emerge from the ruptured core, trying to grab Luana and the fragments of the freed souls. She feels the crushing weight of the evil force trying to pull her down, but something inside her resists. It is as if the memories of the passengers, the hopes and dreams contained in the glowing objects, are giving her strength. Luana uses the last shreds of energy left within her to push the glowing objects directly into the entity's core. The impact creates a massive wave of energy that crosses all of Limbo, completely breaking the connection between the entity and the trapped souls. For a moment, everything is completely silent. The darkness disappears completely, leaving only Luana suspended in an infinite white void. She feels a strange peace, as if she has finally broken the eternal cycle of suffering. As Luana floats in this white space, she notices that her body is slowly disappearing. His hands begin to disintegrate into luminous particles, followed by the rest of his body. She understands that her sacrifice was necessary to destroy the entity and free the trapped souls, but this means that she will also not be able to return to the real world. Before disappearing completely, Luana sees the souls of the passengers floating around her. They are no longer shadows. Now they are translucent and serene figures, free from the entity's evil influence. Among them are Carla, Rafael, and even Enrique. They look at Luana with expressions of gratitude before disappearing into the light. Luana feels one last wave of warmth and comfort before being consumed by the light. On the ship Eternal Ocean, the remaining passengers awaken as if they had come out of a collective nightmare. The missing do not return, but the ship's atmosphere seems to have completely changed. The heavy, oppressive air is gone, the lights are bright again, and the peaceful sound of the waves replaces the disturbing noises that previously echoed through the corridors. The crew find Henrique's notebook on the upper deck, open to a page with hastily written words. The cycle has been broken. No one can explain how or why, but everyone feels that something dark has finally been defeated. As the ship returns to Rio de Janeiro, one of the crew finds an old camera lying on the floor near Luana's cabin. When reviewing the photos stored there, he sees disturbing images. Shadowy figures still wandering the ship's corridors, but now they appear to be looking directly into the lens. In the last photo recorded by the camera, there is a clear image of Luana's face, but his eyes are completely black. The eternal ocean docks in the port of Rio de Janeiro under a cloudy sky, as if the weather itself reflected the dark events that took place at sea. The remaining passengers disembark in silence, without exchanging many words. Despite being physically intact, something inside them has changed. Many cannot clearly remember the events on board, as if their memories have been erased or distorted. All that's left is a feeling of emptiness and restlessness. The disappearances are officially recorded as unexplained accidents, and the crew avoids any mention of what actually happened. The ship is quickly prepared for its next voyage, while authorities and those responsible for the cruise treat the events as isolated incidents, unrelated to any curse or supernatural phenomenon. Luana, however, is not among those who disembark. Her cabin is empty, and no sign of her is found on board. For the passengers and crew, she is just another name on the list of the missing, another victim of something that no one dares to try to understand. Among the passengers returning to dry land are those who carry fragments of memory of the strange events. Rafael, the doctor, feels overwhelming guilt for not having done more to help Luana and the other missing people. He tries to rationalize what happened, but fleeting images of shadows in the hallways and Luana's determined gaze before her disappearance continue to haunt him. Other passengers begin to report disturbing dreams after disembarking. Visions of the dark sea, shadowy figures watching in the distance, and an ancient ship slowly sinking into the depths of the ocean. These dreams are always accompanied by a suffocating feeling of being watched. Days after arriving at port, one of the crew finds something strange in a maintenance room on the lower levels of the ship, an old camera lying on the floor. When reviewing the photos stored in it, he finds disturbing images taken during the trip. Photos that show passengers missing in seemingly normal moments, but with shadowy figures in the background. In the last photo recorded by the camera is Luana. She appears standing on the upper deck of the ship, looking directly into the lens. His face is partially covered in shadows, but his eyes shine brightly, not with darkness or emptiness, but with something that appears to be determination. It's as if she was still fighting for something, or trying to send a message. The crew member feels a chill when looking at the image and decides to delete the photos immediately. However, when he returns to the room where he found the camera, it is no longer there. Despite efforts to keep the ship in operation, rumors begin to circulate among the crew about strange events that continue to happen on board. Footsteps echoing in empty corridors during the early hours of the morning, distorted reflections in cabin mirrors, and whispers coming from the walls when the ship is out at sea. In a particularly unsettling moment, one of the engineers reports finding ancient markings engraved on the metallic structure of the hull, symbols similar to those described in the records of the sinking of the Aurora Maris. No one can explain how these symbols appeared there or what they mean. Despite this, the eternal ocean continues to sail through Brazilian waters, transporting new passengers in search of fun and adventure. To them, it's just another luxury cruise. But to those who know what came before, the ship carries with it an invisible weight, a silent reminder of all that was lost. As the ship sets off again on its next voyage under the pale glow of the full moon, something seems different on the horizon. A lone figure is seen on the upper deck, a woman with long hair and dark clothes. She remains still as she watches the city lights fade into the distance. No one knows who she is or how she got there, but those who look at it long enough feel a strange presence, not threatening but not comforting either. It's like she's waiting for something or someone, and then she disappears into the darkness of the night.